Okay, intro to Unit 3, macro. Here we go. This is all about the aggregate demand and aggregate supply chart. And so I made these cool posters for school, which nobody's in anymore, but this is what the aggregate demand, aggregate supply looks like. You've got typically price level, real GDP, aggregate supply upward sloping, aggregate demand downward sloping, and a long run aggregate supply. We're only going to do this one at a time, but this is the most, one curve at a time. This is the most important graph in all of macroeconomics. The AD, aggregate demand, AS, aggregate supply, short run aggregate supply, and then the long run aggregate supply. So we'll do one curve at a time. So in order to do that, we have to get some groundwork first. So what is aggregate demand? Well, it's a downward sloping demand curve. All demand curves are downward sloping negative slopes, and you just write AD instead of D. What does aggregate mean? Aggregate means all. So all demand for all things, all goods and services. Over here, instead of P, just for price of a specific good, you have the average price level. You could write just PL, but I prefer that you put APL so you remember it's average price level. It's not just the one price of one good. Down here, you have a small r and then GDP, which is real GDP. This is also could be called output, right? Depending on the approach which you're adding up all the GDP for the economy. And how do you add up GDP? How do you add up aggregate demand? You add the four components, the output approach. So expenditure approach, C, I, GP, and NX. You add them together. In unit, we're going to be talking about specifically these two, consumption and government purchases. I is unit 4, NX is unit 5. Okay? Now that we know the basics, we're going to be covering AD here, why it slopes downward, and then when does it shift. All right, that's what we're doing in this video here. So why does it slope downward? Well, if you remember back in Unit 1, we talked about demand sloping downward and the 3 reasons why demand sloped downward. You have to memorize them on your exam. But just to remind you, they were the income effect. Right? If price of a good went down, I have more income, more purchasing power, so I buy more. If price goes up, I have less income per good, so therefore I buy less. The substitution effect, if price goes up for Coke, well, I don't want to buy it. I'll buy the one that's cheaper than Pepsi, so I'll buy more of that. So people buy more of that particular good, more quantity. And the law of diminishing marginal utility. Mangoes. Remember, I talked about mangoes. I love that first mango. I'll pay $5 for it. The second one, I love it, but I'm not willing to pay $5 for it. I'll still eat it, but only maybe for $4 or $3.50. The third one, wow, I don't really need a third one. But $2? Okay, I'll have one. So you buy more as the price goes down because you have the law of diminishing marginal satisfaction or diminishing additional satisfaction, right? The word utility means satisfaction. Well, these 3 reasons are almost the same as the 3 reasons why the aggregate demand slopes downward. So the first one is the closest to the income effect. The aggregate demand slopes downward because of what's called the real balance effect. What does that mean? Well, if prices go up, then I have less purchasing power. All people have less purchasing power for all things. If price goes down, then more people have more purchasing power, so therefore they buy more. That's why it's downward sloping. As price goes down, people buy more. As price goes up. So it's very, very similar to the income effect of an individual. The second one is not like this. It's called the interest rate effect. Now, here's where interest rates start to become super important. Interest is the price of money. Interest is important if you want to borrow money. Interest is important if you want to lend money. So, from the lender's point of view, from the economy's point of view, when P goes up, lenders charge a higher interest rate. Right? The price of goods are higher, so people who lend money want to get a higher return because the price of their rent is going up, price of the goods that they're buying are going up. So therefore, they're only willing to sell their money to you for a higher interest rate. So when P goes up, lenders charge a higher interest rate because they get a greater real return on their interest rate. When prices go down, it's the opposite. Oh, prices are down, money is less expensive. Okay, I'll lower my interest rate for you. I'll give you the money for less return. Hope that makes sense. The third one is the foreign trade effect. This one gets a little tricky sometimes. Foreign trade effect, when price goes down, right? Price goes down, foreigners look at our goods and say, oh, price in America is going down. Well, we can buy those goods that we couldn't buy before. We'll buy more of those goods rather than our own goods. So now we're talking about the international economy. It has more to do with the net exports, but it is a reason why aggregate demand slopes downward because net exports are part of aggregate demand. AD equals CIGP and NX. That's why this is important. Foreign trade effect. All right? Okay, I think we covered it over here. So now that we know why aggregate demand slopes downward, let's look at some other important details. Let's look at each individual one, CIGP and NX. You should write this down. I mean, if not, you can just watch the video again. I don't really care at this point. Remote learning, folks. Aggregate demand, C plus I plus GP plus NX. Let's break down consumption spending. C is consumption spending. They're in size order. Consumption is the largest of the four components of aggregate demand, the four components of real GDP. So what does consumption spending consist of? You have to know this in order to figure out when it shifts. So it's consumer wealth. If the stock market increases, aggregate demand increases. People think they have more wealth. They buy more things when they think they have more wealth. If the stock market decreases, consumption goes down, aggregate demand shifts to the left. If consumers' expectations, if they fear a recession, they're going to hold on to the money and spend less, consumption left. If they think there's going to be an economic boom, they're going to be less likely to hold on to their money, and they're going to spend more money. AD goes to the right. Consumer debt. If we have more debt, there's going to be more consumption. If we have less debt, there's going to be less consumption. Right? We don't owe as much, so therefore we're not spending as much. Taxes. If we are taxed more, guess what happens? We have money. So therefore, there's less consumption. If we get taxed less, we have more money, more consumption. So consumption is very straightforward. Do people have more or less money to spend? And if they are spending more, consumption increases. And remember, if consumption increases, the whole aggregate demand increases. Jumping to the next one, the second largest of the components of GDP is investment. A change in investment spending, I. This is mostly Unit 4. So what you need to know for now is that interest rates have a huge impact on investment spending. The general rule is, this is super, super important for the next unit. When interest rates go down, that means investment spending goes up. What do I mean by investment spending? Investing where? In my business. When interest rates are down, I can borrow money cheaper from the bank, so investment increases. And when investment increases, I hire more workers and unemployment goes up, all these good things happen. So when interest rates go down, I goes up, big investment, and therefore aggregate demand goes up. When interest rates go up, investment decreases, aggregate demand also decreases. Business taxes, same thing when you tax the consumer. If you tax a business, then the investment I goes down, AD goes down. If you decrease taxes on a business, we call it business tax, then AD goes to the right because AD goes to the left when you increase taxes on a business because they're getting taxed more heavily. Okay? Expectations. If a business has good expectations, investment goes up. If they have bad expectations for the future, then investment goes down. That's pretty simple. If there's a technology is increasing, then people tend to invest in technology. So usually technology, people invest more. All right, so that's investment. On the other side, you have GDP, the simplest one. Okay, if the government is spending more on anything, war, healthcare, defense, schools, anything like that, then GP will increase, AD will increase as well. If the government is spending less, what happens? GP goes down, so does AD. Pretty simple. Net exports. Again, this is now unit 5, so a little trickier because we're not thinking along these lines yet. Net exports is exports minus imports. So if any change in net exports impacts the overall aggregate demand, which is the overall GDP. So exchange rates. We haven't talked about these yet, but I think you know what these terms mean. The term depreciates and appreciate. If U.S. dollars are depreciating, right, the value is less. It costs less euros to buy a dollar or less yen to buy a dollar. That means that the U.S. dollar is cheaper. And if the U.S. dollar is cheaper to foreigners, U.S. goods are cheaper, so they're going to buy more of them. So if the U.S. dollar depreciates, is cheaper, then net exports go up because they're going to buy more of our stuff, our exports. And if E gets bigger, so does the GDP. The AD goes to the right. If the U.S. dollar appreciates, then we have a stronger dollar. We buy more cheaper imports. Please write that down and remember those two things. All right? Rewind it and watch it again if you have to. All right? Now, the other concept here, it's very similar, the abroad countries. And I just wrote one sentence down I'd like you to remember. A country's economy impacts another country's economy, impacts the United States' economy. So think about this. If Canada gets a cold, the US gets pneumonia. If Canada has a recession, they have less income. They're buying less overall things, including United States goods. Canada buys more goods from the US than any other country. So if Canada has a recession, what happens to US net exports? We export less, so we produce less. So AD goes to the right because NX goes down. Hope that makes sense. Now that you know the shifters, if any of these are impacted, then the AD will go to the right or to the left. So here's AD. I wrote D, but it should be AD. Right? Here's my average price level, real GDP, and I just drew the AD curve going to the right and going to the left, just like a demand curve. Remember, we're looking for consumption and government purchases. It only shifts in this unit if we're talking about consumption or government purchases. So, I don't think I have one on interest rates here, so you won't see one about investment. Okay. I think we're okay. So write these down if you can read them. Hopefully you can read them. And then I want you to say whether AD goes up or down or maybe stays the same. All right. Pause the video and let's go. If there's the variable is if the decrease in gross investment occurs. If a decrease in gross investment occurs. I know I said only C and GP, but some of these questions have investment involved. Sorry. So decrease in gross investment, what's going to happen? Well, investment's going down. So if investment's going down, then I is going down. And if I goes down, then AD goes to the left. So AD goes down. Consumer confidence rises. Simple. Confidence means they're spending more. Consumers are spending more, so C goes up, so therefore AD goes up. Government cuts military spending. Duh. Government purchases going down, so less spending, that means less GP, AD goes to the left. We buy more Chinese goods. Remember what net exports is. It's exports minus imports, right? So we buy more Chinese goods. What happens? We're buying more Chinese goods. So therefore, which one's getting larger? Our imports are getting larger. So this number is the negative is getting greater. So net exports is going down. AD is going down. The GDP deflator arises. What's the GDP deflator? The GDP deflator has to do with price level. GDP. So prices are going up. What happens when prices are going up? Price doesn't shift a curve. Price doesn't shift a curve. So in this case, with aggregate demand, all it does is it moves up the curve, right? Because prices are going up, so you see a movement up the curve. So nothing. If anything, you say that the quantity demanded decreases. No shift. Consumption goods are taxed more. If they're taxed more, they're more money. So what happens when you tax consumers? AD is going to go to the left. Or consumption goes down, AD to the left. A decrease in U.S. imports. A decrease in U.S. imports. Exports minus imports. This number is getting smaller, so that export number means it's getting larger. We're not buying from abroad, we're buying more domestic. So that means that we're buying less abroad, they must be buying from us, or we're buying from ourselves. Either way, aggregate demand is going to increase. Decrease in U.S. imports means we must be buying more at home. So government builds 10,000 more schools. Easy. Government spending up, GP up, AD up. Wages decrease in the U.S. overall. Be very careful here. If this said income, then you could say consumption's gonna go down, because right, wages decrease, income decreases. But this says wages decrease. Wages is not a term that a consumer uses. Consumer says I get income. But a supplier, a person who owns a factory, owns a business, they pay wages. So this is a supply question. So in this case, the aggregate demand would do nothing. However, we don't have it yet, but if there were an aggregate supply, the aggregate supply would go to the right. Wages go down, that means lower input costs, so suppliers can hire more workers. So it's a bit of a trick question here. Be very careful. Okay, think about that when we get to the next topic. Decrease in the budget deficit. Another tough one. A decrease in the budget deficit. What's a deficit? Well, you have taxes. The taxes go to the government, and the government then has a budget. And then they spend. If they spend the same amount, it's balanced. If they overspend and you have a deficit,